right. Men are very emotional. And here's the thing, as a result, a lot of men are not highly verbal, is often they didn't see divorce coming. Okay? Often they miss the signs of divorce. Maybe social media, it may be podcasting, have what I call sort of a toxic masculinity.
Hi, guys. We really have a good show for you in this episode, and we want to talk about something that is often buried behind silence: men's mental health. That's the topic: men's mental health. So, from the crowded street of Lagos to the quiet towns of Europe, from Tokyo's neon bars to the suburb of Chicago, there is one thing in common among men: they are struggling, and too often silently. In Africa, many men carry the weight of poverty, unemployment, and illness without anyone to talk to. In South Africa, for example, men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women, and yet mental health services are scarce. Most men won't even consider seeing a therapist. Why? Because they were taught to man up, not to open up. In Europe, especially Western Europe, the male suicide rate is among the highest in the world. Think of countries like Lithuania or Russia. Alcohol abuse, loneliness, and outdated idea of masculinity are tearing men apart from the inside. In Asia, the pressure to succeed is suffocating. In India, over 90,000 men took their own lives in a single year, often due to financial stress. In Japan and South Korea, men are buckling under the pressure of long work hours, expectation, and social isolation. And in the United States, men are more than 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Veteran farmers, college students, so many are suffering in silence. We see the smile on the outside, but behind closed door, it is a different story. Men are struggling. What's the common thread? Silence, shame, a belief that to be a man means to suffer alone. With us in the studio, we are joined by a specialist. He's a psychologist, double PhD, in one in psychology and one in brain science. So he knows this topic better than anyone. And welcome, Dave.
Thank
Welcome to
you.
the show.
Yes, I am very excited to be here today. It's a remarkably important topic we're addressing today.
Yeah, very interesting show. Let's go straight to the numbers. So, so we know there is a stigma, especially in the African culture, a stigma that is to say a man has to be strong, right?
Yeah.
So a man has to be strong. A man should not show emotion, and that leads to emotional suppression. So,
Yeah.
and we see that in Africa, 11%, taking the sample size of 100,000 men, 11% suffer from attempt in suicide. So, and so we can see, could there be a correlation between uh, emotional suppression and the suicide rate that is in the African context in this case?
Yes, Dr. Minko, I think when we start to talk about mental health in males, in men, we have to realize that this is really a silent crisis that we're dealing with today. And it's because of the fact that the way males are raised, the way boys become men, is to learn that stoicism, being stoic, hiding our emotions, is equatable to strength. And so it makes it so that many men have a very difficult time talking about their emotions, including me. I am not free from this either. I think we all have to challenge as men the tendency to hide and bury our emotions. Your statistic, 11.5 men in 100,000 in Africa attempt to commit suicide. Now, if you think about that, that's not unique to Africa. I think you will be able to present some other statistics that show that, well, in Africa, we have 11 in 100,000. In other nations, it may even be higher in other parts of the world than what we see across the continent of Africa.
Okay, thank you for that. Indeed, these statistics are not only isolated. This is not an isolated case, as we will see in as the show proceed. So, Dave, there is also another issue that we also see why men get into depression and maybe mental health issues. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk, for example, the issue of let's start with unemployment. How does unemployment lead to mental issue in men?
I'd really like to discuss that, and it's a critical issue. So if you think about it, Dr. Menko, we all have measuring sticks we use to scale how we're doing in our lives, right? So a measuring stick, a common measuring stick for men is employment. What is employment attached to? Employment is attached to the ability to support a family, to provide stress-free living for a partner, a wife, protection of the child. If you go all the way back in time and you look at societies that have been on the globe before the one we live in today, we discovered that this has commonly been the case, that men are seen as a hunter, the man is going out and striking down the animal, whatever the case may be. And that translates today to feeling as if we have to be able to provide for our families, and we do, in order to measure up. So how many boys were raised with phrases like, do not cry, man up, right? Boys don't cry. What are these phrases? These phrases are meant to encourage in a male, in a boy developing to manhood, the desire to go out and be strong, to resist stress, and to provide for the family. So yes, it is a very major crisis in a man's life if they are unemployed. And what we discover is that that unemployment will lead men to be embarrassed, to hold themselves in lower esteem, and it really becomes the core root issue for many, many other issues that confront men that we'll discuss today when we talk about mental health or mental illness. Men who are unemployed feel less than. And really what we need to say is that unemployment happens to most people at some point. It does not mean that you are worthless. It does not mean that you don't have value or that it won't get better in the future. But how many men have taken their lives because they could not face the fact that they could not provide for their families?
That's quite interesting, and because we know, especially I don't know in the Western culture, I believe it should be the same. Men are supposed to be the providers, so men are supposed to provide. As you said, they
Yeah.
are the hunters. So in the modern world, they are the one that put food on the table. Although the world also advocate for a 50-50 between male and
Mhm.
female. But that 50-50 somehow it seems like has neglected men. What can you say about that?
I can say this, that really when we think about it, you're right. In the world today we live in, there are equal opportunities provided for men and for women, and that's fine. But the topic here is, how does this affect a man? Because even if we know in the world today that women go to work and men go to work, A male who is unemployed secretly suffers in silence about their worth. They can withdraw, they can pull back, as we're going to discuss, I'm sure, addiction, the use of substances. All of these things are used to mask the feeling that I'm not worthwhile if I cannot be as I think I should be. So, despite the fact the world has a place for men and for women to work, fine, a man who is unemployed has a very strong negative self image. And I think that is certainly something that needs to be addressed. We need to realize that the real strength of a man is the ability to express emotion. The real strength of a man is the ability to talk about what they're experiencing. And maybe as a man, I can only talk to another man about this. Maybe I can't talk about this in my family, in my church, in my gathering. Maybe I can only discuss it with another man, but I need to discuss that, because if I don't, then I suffer in silence. If you really think about the topic today, it is the silent crisis, suffering in silence, that men experience when things like unemployment happen.
Let's take, for
Right?
example, you lost employment. So when
Yes.
will you get to the level that one may say, I think I'm going through a mental breakdown?
Right. This is essential, because one of the problems of the male brain versus the female brain is that males are challenged to express emotion. Okay. Now, by that I mean a highly verbal male, a male who is able to express himself, is often not a common event, right? More men are likely to hide these emotions inside, right? So what happens is that we as men do not have a good model of depression. So, in a woman, for example, a depressed woman may have more freedom to express her emotions than a man. So, men often start to find themselves in anger or withdrawal, right? We know that angry men are a real problem. You just need to pick the paper up and read the headlines of people doing such things as shootings or other types of things across the globe, not just in the United States. You have men who are becoming angry. They may withdraw. And what happens when we withdraw is we go into isolation. Isolation is a very dangerous place for the brain, because we are social creatures. I need you and you need me. You and I are friends. I need to be able to call you and feel comfortable in saying, hey, you know what? I'm having this difficulty. But that's not the things that men typically do. So what we find is that for instance, I'm sure in Africa, you may see men who are suffering this who go into isolation. I know we see it in America. I know we see men in America who are experiencing this, who go into seeking relief from alcoholism.
Okay.
We see our relief in alcohol, resulting in alcoholism. We see men who may become obsessed with pornography or other things in an attempt to block these experiences.
Including pornography is also as a result of mental issues?
In my opinion, yes. Okay, so in my opinion,
In some cases.
yeah, in some cases. What I would say to you is this: that when we start to talk about any of the number of behaviors, I am a believer that the brain can, in some cases, lose control. By that I mean that when we look at addiction, for example, maybe it's addiction to alcohol or
Yeah.
gambling or pornography or drugs, the brain has developed a condition in which it cannot control its own behavior.
Okay.
Okay? So it's a disorder of control. Do we see that in the case of pornography? Absolutely. People do become addicted to pornographic images. And, if you look at it, and I happen to know that this is not just, say, in the United States, this is a global issue, that people will use their telephones now, their smartphones, and may spend much of the day looking at these images and may not even know why, right? So
Exactly.
all of these things are designed to take the person away from the experience of, of depression or of stress or of anxiety when these conditions become out of control, what we think of as addiction. So, yes, I think that you have some very, very serious behaviors that can start to emerge in stressed people, whether they're male or female, but certainly in today's topic, in men, we have a number of what we would call maladaptive coping mechanisms, ways that we cope that don't really solve the problem, but give us relief in the moment from the problem.
From temporal relief.
Yes, yes. And I think, of course, what happens is that if we do not address a problem, typically speaking, we shouldn't be surprised if that problem increases in magnitude, if it gets bigger, right? So we need to be aware of the fact that there are successful, healthy ways to cope, and there are other ways that really just change the chemistry in the brain for a moment. And in doing so, make us feel better for a moment. But what we want is change that lasts over a lifetime, right? We want to make good changes.
Good changes. Okay. Um, there is something that quite shocked me in the statistics,
Yes.
because when I look at the statistics, it looks like Africa, though there are some prevalent cases of attempt suicide and so forth, but Africa is actually the lowest
Yes.
among the countries in terms of attempt suicide and suicide cases, with America being the highest among the countries that are listed by the World Health Organization. So my
Mm-hmm.
question is, why a country where everybody is so much poised to go and look for a greener pasture, why is there so much attempt suicide or suicide rate among men?
Mm-hmm. I think first, I think this will be a shocking statistic for most people listening to the show today. And that is that the attempted suicide rate in America per 100,000 is roughly, I think you said before the show, double the
Twice.
rate, twice the rate of what we would see in Africa. And yet at the other end of the extreme, I'm certain I'm not in Africa today, but I'm certain if I was looking at it from maybe Africa, I might think, well, look at all the benefits that Americans may have. Why is this
Mhm.
occurring? Now, I think we can trace this to many factors. Okay, now,
Okay.
first of all, we know that when people use alcohol, which is very common in America, well, it's not very common, half of America drinks and half of America doesn't. So it's about
Yeah.
50-50. But we know that when people become what we might think of as alcoholic or heavy drinkers, it can increase the suicide rate dramatically, 600% increase in men who are in their 40s and 50s compared to men who don't drink. So that's a
Yeah.
factor. Our society is quite comfortable with alcohol. Let's go further. When we look at American society, I am American and I have grown up in this system. It's quite easy to become isolated if I do not reach out to other people. So, an American workday, for example, might involve a long commute, distance from the family, difficulty getting home, high pressure from finance. And if I don't reach out to other people, and by that I mean I'm a big fan personally of men's groups. I think they've helped me dramatically, right? Being able to, it's got a scriptural reference as iron sharpens iron, so do the wits of one man sharpen the wits of
Yes.
another, right?
Yes.
So when we think about it, one of the things that has to happen to address this rate, in my mind, is we must start to reduce the isolation that the American male experiences. Another thing, we need to raise young men in America to feel like they can share their emotions, right?
Okay.
Because I think one of the things we have a difficulty with is American males are taught that it's not something that we should be able to do, right? So that's another problem. And then the final piece in my mind is American society is bombarded by media imagery, right?
Okay.
And one of the issues we face is that many of the media icons that we have elevated, and it may not be media, it may be social media, it may be podcasting, have what I call sort of a toxic masculinity. They present sort of the amplified version of a superhero who is
Yes.
fearless and not penetrable when it comes to emotion. And I think that that model is damaging. So all of those factors combine together. Now there are other factors here. What is the role of a father? Whether it's here in America or in Africa or in Asia, what is the role of the father? Are fathers in America doing the right job of transmitting values to offspring, male offspring, to sons? Are they out there telling them about what it means to be a man, really what it means to be a man? That there are going to be times of stress, there are going to be difficulties that we face, right? These things need to be addressed. And I think if we fail that, we end up with an isolated group of men who have difficulty expressing themselves and find themselves withdrawing and in anger.
That is that. Yeah. Thank you for those points. Thank you for those points. Because, for example, in Africa, I know that we have, although we have our own problems, for example, extended families and so forth, but the family is a very important factor in African society. And you see, you will see your grandmother, your cousin, extended relatives. So all those, the bond is always there, so you are always surrounded by people. So even when
Mm-hmm.
there is when poverty, you can feel there is poverty accentuated in Africa. Of course, if you look at in terms of the economy and the financial status, from
Mm-hmm.
if you compare men in Africa and men in America, there is no comparison. But when I looked at this statistic, then I was like, hold on, how come Africa, where we know people are suffering or there is poverty, how come then the suicide? Then there should be something else. Now you've now
Mm-hmm.
put it to say it is isolationism. So
Mm-hmm.
the men living in isolation, because I believe I've been in America once for conference, and I've seen that it's a very fast-paced country, and people mind their own businesses. There's really no time for families. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
as you have said, so that could be the major factor here, where
I think
you
so.
see there is little time for the families, and there is really no one to tell your story, because everybody is just busy chasing the money, chasing the dollars. So
Yes.
I don't know that this is how I see. You see, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you have anything to say about that.
No, I think one of the things we must do as a society, if we are to survive, is we must look at ourselves. And when I say that, I mean, every citizen of every country likely is proud of their country, as am I of America. This is not to negate the strengths of America in any way. It is to say, though, we must take a look at this. My belief is that the rates of sort of, if you will, this self-abuse, these states of mental illness, this sort of silent cry, the alcoholism, the drug use, those things do reflect American culture in the year 2025. The last decade, we have seen these changes, right? And what we need to think in the next 10 years is that we can do a better job today of modeling healthy behavior. So, what I hear you saying, and I think it's very interesting, if you and I approach this as a global perspective, which we are, you're in Africa, I'm here, and you and I have been working together on other things, you're saying, hey, in Africa, that family support is intact. It's not torn apart, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
it's not uncommon in America for people to be many miles away from work, to commute, to come home late, to feel the stress of large burdens, financial difficulties. And these things tear at that. So what we want is not things that pull us apart, but pull us together. And what I hear you saying that you think is a strength in Africa, and I think you're probably right on, is that the family is pulling together when it faces stress. What we need to do, we need to learn to pull together. And this is probably a global message that can reach other parts of the world as well, right? Other countries have high rates of suicide, Africa being the lowest, but you can see throughout the globe there are times that people do reach despair and suicide becomes an option. Depression becomes a reality. How do we pull the family together? Because who's going to help you? Your family, your community, those people you've built. What is true friendship? If you have true friendship, you're able to turn to that person, lean into that person, say, make me strong through your strength, right? Those are things we need to do.
Okay. So, all right. So let's get to another cause here. So, okay. So Africa. So we can see the causes of trauma and mental health in men is mostly conflict and unemployment. So conflict,
Mm-hmm.
unemployment, and also basically the violence. But now let's look at Europe. Europe, the number one cause is work stress and divorce. Can you try to touch on those two aspects, work
Work
stress
stress,
and
of course,
divorce?
yes. Right. So let's take, okay, again, work stress. Very, very interesting topic because if you and I somehow held this discussion 200 years ago or
Yes,
300 years ago, my work stress may very well have been, are the crops in the field going to grow this
yes,
year, right?
yes.
Is my animal going to live long enough for me to slaughter the animal and eat it, right? Or take it to market and sell it? Right? And so I did have work stress, right? But one of the things that happens today is work stress is very much like, how could we describe it? It's nonstop. It's like, it's always changing. It's always uncertain. There's more pressure. There's more struggle to compete, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
so when we start to look at work stress, one of the things that we see here is that it feels like a never ending story for many people, not just men, but women too, right?
yes,
I mean, if we
yes.
held this topic discussing women, it might be I'm working to keep my family because two incomes are needed. I have kids, they're over here, I need to get there. All of these things could be factors in this discussion. Now, one of the problems we have is that many men kind of go through their work stress thinking it will get better, it will get better, next year will be better, and we live in the future, right? And then it doesn't get better, and one day we realize this is not going to get better, and we have a crisis, right?
Yeah.
So when we look, it's very interesting in America when we looked at farmers who committed suicide in the Midwest. What we
Mm,
discovered is a lot of times the farmer would hold on to the idea it's going to get better next year, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, and then it doesn't. They go to the
mm,
bank and the bank says, I can't finance your crops, or whatever the case may be, and the
mm,
person has a crisis and they collapse under it. So work stress is high intensity in today's world. It is the expectations to be a productive worker are probably the highest in the history of humankind, right?
mm,
You aren't pacing yourself, you're trying to keep in that competitive pool. Uh, Men tend to live in the future and think it's going to be better. And then if it doesn't happen, especially men of European descent, have a great ability to sort of project into the future instead of living in the moment, right?
mhm.
If that happens, what happens here is it overwhelms them, and that's very very uh, difficult and can easily result in a psychological crisis. If the guy doesn't have the ability to reach out, that crisis is experienced alone, and it can be overwhelming. Now let's take on the next topic, divorce. Okay,
Divorce, yes.
divorce is, I mean, it's a huge topic. And one of the things I've noticed about males in divorce is often they didn't see divorce coming. Okay?
Okay.
Often
Okay.
they miss the signs of divorce. Okay? And one day divorce is here. And they're like, what do you mean we're getting divorced? Um,
Yeah.
they're thinking, well, yeah, it's hard and every day is a little bit of a challenge, but they don't realize that this is heading there, right? And then one day they're separated and they're in a crisis. So one of the problems in divorce, really literally speaking, you can go back hundreds of years and discover, at least in America, if you read historical information, there were divorces, there were separations, but in today's world, it is a very easily accomplished task if you want to divorce in America, for example, right?
Yes.
Uh, I think one of the things we have to look at here is that divorced males in, let's say, their 50s, not an uncommon time for divorce, often die within 4 or 5 years from the stress of that divorce, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
men in divorce really do struggle. They go from living in a household where they may not acknowledge it or even appreciate it, but they have somebody helping them with their emotions, with the workload, with keeping the house going. And suddenly one day they're alone and they are
Alone. Yeah.
extremely alone. And their whole world they suddenly realize was that family, right?
So it
And they
comes
had
back to isolation.
yes, right back to isolation is, for many of the listeners, we use digital film today, but when I was growing up, film was developed in a dark room, right? And we
Yeah.
used to say that isolation was a dark room you develop your secrets in, right? So isolation is a very, very damaging thing for the human brain. We are not meant to be alone.
It looks like everything comes back to isolation. Now,
Yes.
for example, there is a case, not a case, there are cases where if a spouse passed away
Hmm. Yes.
and a few years later, then the other one also died. But
Yes. Many things.
I've not checked the statistics, but what I've noticed is that it's most likely that the male spouse, if the wife dies first, the male spouse will die a few years just
Yes.
after. But in
Hmm.
some cases, if the male spouse is the one that dies first, the wife can survive even many more years.
Yes. That is true. I think that observation is accurate, and I think again, what we realize is that the male may not see this, but the male
Yeah,
is so dependent upon, so entwined in the family, even if they are often out of the home, that when you
yeah.
pull that away from them, their coping skills, whether that's even doing the laundry, doing the bills, loneliness, loneliness
Okay.
is absolutely devastating to a male. And what happens is that that male has sort of stopped the behavior of reaching outside into society often. So suddenly they're alone, their partner is gone, and they really don't know how to rejoin society. Again, what I would say to you is it's essential that men have developed a group that supports them, whether it's in divorce or the loss of a spouse, that is pre-existing, that is there before these things happen. Somebody they can lean into. Probably in my own struggles, my own life, I think groups of men that I've ended up working with have absolutely helped me through so many tough times
Mm.
because I can lean into that group and that group is able to reach out to me and help me. So that's one of the things I would take away from this today is there's no weakness in getting an accountability group, a group that
Yeah.
holds you accountable. And listening to the mind of that group is very useful, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think if you were to say one thing to men who may be facing this, getting that group, and it's going to feel unusual. We like to say if you join a group, the first time you go to a group, maybe it's an informal group, maybe it's friends, maybe it's through your church, your synagogue, whatever. right?
Yeah.
You may feel abnormal. You don't feel, it's hard. If
Mm.
you look at in America, and I know in Africa too, we have Alcoholics Anonymous and other things that are groups that are set up for people struggling with alcohol. And
Yes.
people will say in those groups, it will take you 50 visits to the group before you believe you belong. So, one of the things I would tell men is if you're going to go and reach out to other guys, and let's say you all meet down at the coffee shop or you go out to eat, hopefully not a bar because then there's alcohol and other things. It's not the first time you are not going to feel like you belong there. The second
Mm.
time you won't. 10 times in, you'll still be saying, oh, I don't really want to go. And then one day you're going to realize that that group is feeding you and you need to go. Right?
Yeah. 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 Dave, it's quite impressive and even shocking that the creature that
Yes.
was supposed to be less emotional is
Yes.
actually the one that appears to be the most emotional.
Yes. Think about it. Who writes all the love songs? It's it's the men, right? I mean, so right? Men are very emotional, and here's the thing: as a result, a lot of men are not highly verbal, right? So they're
Yes.
kind of trapped in there. Okay, so you ask in you might get angry listeners saying male, female. No, it could, nobody's saying this is cast in stone. You could have females who are not verbal. I'm not saying that, but this is a topic. Today's topic is the silent crisis, the call for help of males. So we're talking
Yeah.
about that. So males as a whole, really a female may be able to tell you a lot about her emotions. A male
Mm.
might just go, that's an emotional expression for a male, right?
Yes.
Many
Yes.
males are so nonverbal, you say, what's going on? They go, I don't know. They don't know. So, one of the things we need to do is help males to sort of start to access that part of the brain that says, this is what's bothering me. And, the
Yes.
best way is if I'm in a group with other men, I hear my story in that group. So, let's say it's divorce, and I get together with a group of other guys who are divorced, and I've done that,
Mm.
okay?
Yeah.
And I hear my story in there. You see, somebody else is telling me my story as I sit in that chair. So even if I'm not sharing, I'm hearing my story. I'm hearing my story about what's it like to come home the first day in divorce and suddenly the person you've been with for many years is not there, right?
Mm.
I hear my story, okay? So a group should provide that service to its members, right?
Mm.
So I am a big supporter of that.
Mm. Mm. Oh no, thank you very much. Before we close, I just want to throw this also here uh, for interest sake. Um, Japan and North Korea. Japan
Yes.
and North Korea. So they also have their issues there. So they have. We've been talking all around about isolation, but I see
Hmm.
that uh, it's not a special case to the United States. I see Japan and South Korea, sorry, uh, the high work culture pressure and social isolation is the
Yes.
leading cause of anxiety and suicide.
Yes. Yes. And it is true. So here's a different culture. So let's look at and you're the expert on Africa. I've worked throughout this African experience for many years myself, but
Yes,
you know it from being raised there, so you could comment on this. But let's go to Japan, for example. In
yeah,
Japan, in America, we have an individualism. We value the individual. In Japanese culture, you value the group, right? So it's a very
okay,
different culture, right? So many behaviors in America that we might think reflect individualism, maybe in Japan might be considered very rude or very selfish because it's the value is the group. So bringing that group honor, bringing that group wealth, prosperity, that's the measuring stick within that culture as I read it. I'm not Japanese. Um, but as I read it, that's the case. So in that particular case, right, failure is a really magnified event. It's a very
Oh, I
shame
see.
oriented
I
event.
get it. I get it.
Yes,
I get it.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
that is,
so,
whoa.
yeah. I read many years ago that in Japanese work culture, the greatest shame is if you are called a window sitter. So if you have not been productive, they may put you out by the window where you do nothing, right? And maybe some other places that might be, oh well, I'm not doing anything. This is good. In that setting, that is a sign of shame because that means you have
Okay.
not brought to the culture of the community that you work within, the productivity that brings honor to the group. So yes, that pressure there is enormous. And I have many friends from all parts of Asia, and living in Seattle, Washington, it's very integrated, interesting culture. And many of my friends who are from Japan have talked about the literal back-breaking pressure to perform within the group. So I believe that that is probably its own factor. So the fact is, we're probably every culture is unique, but all of us need to address these issues.
Please just maybe uh, tell us a bit about veteran, because I also know when I
Oh
was
yes,
reading some articles, I also noticed that veterans also suffer high level of anxiety and suicide attempt in the
very
US.
true. And I have a deep appreciation of all people who have served and put their lives on the line. So we take a moment and we acknowledge the tremendous contributions people have made in serving their nations, right? But that comes inherently with trauma, and it comes inherently with an issue where you have been asked to set aside and be selfless in order to serve your nation. And we know that post traumatic stress anxiety disorders or symptoms or syndromes, depending on how you want to look at it, are very real. That people who've had trauma change. It changes your brain to have trauma. Maybe you've had trauma as a child, maybe you've had it as an adult in combat, maybe it's a little bit different. But the fact is, that trauma combined often with minimal amounts or some degree of brain damage from concussion explosions leads to a very vulnerable group. So we must be clear that people, and I can't speak for all of the globe, but I can speak for America, where I know quite a lot about this, is that the risk of homelessness, the risk of suicide, the risk of drug abuse,
Yes.
of domestic violence, all of these things go up if we do not address the fact that people who have been in combat, who are veterans, are people who are going to not only have the issues we've discussed today, but the additional issues that often accompany the fact they have seen things that are horrific. They've been asked to serve. They may have lost people right next to them. They may have had injuries that are
Yes.
terrible. They may have lived in fear over many years. And we need to be aware of the fact that even parts of the brain they can't talk about, memories are embedded there that may intrude into their day-to-day life. So it's a
Mm.
special. We need to address it in a special manner, and we need to realize that. And again, I'll say I believe that veterans helping veterans, that's an amazing thing, right? People who understand what the military experience is are able to really reach in there and help. But we look across Africa, you look in DRC and other areas, you're going to have people right now who have survived traumatic events who are going to need the same type of care.
Thank you, Dave. This was
Thank you.
a fantastic episode.
It is.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the statistics, you've heard the stories, and you've heard the causes. So, if you are listening to this and you are struggling, please hear me. You are not alone. Your life matters. Your stories matters, and there is help. So I'm Dr. Minko, and with me is Dave Scratchley, a
Yes.
doctor in psychology, and you've heard how he unpacked these things. So these are things that he covers on a day-to-day basis. So this is Rafiki Media. And if this episode moved you, please share it and start a conversation. You might just save a life. Thank you for
Indeed.
now, and see you next time.